Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding. Thank you very much. As our dignitaries come in and take their seats. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As our dignitaries settle down, you may now take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the final point, final session of our 2 days of deliberations. And it has been a fascinating ride. Interesting conversations, passionately delivered, insights, challenges. I now want to welcome Professor Andrew Temu to come forward and take us through a statement from the forum. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Her Excellency Mama Samia Suluhu, Vice President, United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Benjamin Mkapa, Chairman of the 2019 African Leaders Forum and former President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Excellencies, former Presidents, distinguished Forum delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to take this opportunity to present the summary of the meeting in the form of a statement from the Forum, from the 6th Africa Leadership Forum of 2019. The theme, as we all know, was promoting good natural resource management for socio-economic transformation in Africa. As members of the Forum, we put on record that the meeting was held in Dar es Salaam on 29th and 30th August 2019. The objective was to reflect on the potential for land, wildlife, fishery, and forestry in fostering socio-economic transformation in Africa and address the noted widespread unsustainable use of natural resources across the continent, as well as the anticipated socio-economic, environmental, and climate change consequences. The meeting was addressed by His Excellency Dr. John Pombe Magufuli and attended throughout the meeting by Her Excellency Mama Samia Suluhu, the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania. Join me to give her a thanks. Welcoming remarks and keynote address were delivered by the Forum Chairman, His Excellency Benjamin William Mkapa, and we also put on record that the meeting was attended by the 5 other heads of states. In attendance also were heads of multinational and United Nations organizations, regional economic communities, leaders of business, government, civil society, and academia from across Africa. The following are key messages and recommendations that come from the discussions. They are organized starting with the deliberations after the keynote address, and subsequently along the themes of the 3 closed sessions. Keynote presentation and plenary discussions. After the keynote address, participants addressed the question on whether Africa is aware of the potentials of available land, wildlife, fishery, forestry resources in fostering socio-economic transformation. As a result, we noted that there are differences in levels of awareness depending on who is being addressed. The learned technocrats and scientists are aware of the potential and intricacies of using natural resources. However, the common man, citizens, and especially the lowly educated population may be less knowledgeable about the potential that Africa has or about the consequences of alternative uses of natural resources. From a different angle, Africans may be very aware of the potentials of natural resources, but fail in the know-how of how to sustainably tap these resources. The forum observed that when natural resources are used for livelihoods, it is in ways that impact negatively on the environment. A good example is the dilemma elucidated by Mr. Mufuruki, and I quote his statement: "The scale of charcoal business in Africa and the fact that governments generate revenue from charcoal through taxation versus the negative impact on the environment places government in serious dilemma of what to do." Awareness may be there, but there is an apparent lack of effort to prioritize issues centered around the factors leading to negative impacts of natural resources: land tenure, population growth, suboptimal water catchment management systems, unsustainable harvesting of forestry and fishery resources, and the like are at hand. This awareness ought to be linked with Africa's education systems such that our future generations manage resources more sustainably. His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki alerted on the need to disaggregate the challenges such that we are context-specific in articulating solutions for various observed problems. Such differentiation could be by types of natural resources or by geographical locations. And we have 3 recommendations to African governments. 1, governments should invest in research whose result would inform leaders about better natural resources management strategies. Such research should focus especially on rural economies, their socio-economic development strategies, and how to mitigate negative environmental impact. An example is research on the use of alternative energy sources, starting with addressing the problem of cutting trees for domestic charcoal. Number 2, governments are advised to pursue aggressive awareness-raising campaigns about the implications of mismanaging natural resources and ultimate consequences on economic development. The target should not only be the common man, but also the political leadership. The goal should be to harness political will for proper management of natural resources. Government's initiatives, that's the 3rd one, to undertake natural resources management ought to be implemented with clear understanding of the needs of people in terms of their livelihoods and their medium and long-term development perspectives and desire. We went into a closed session number 1, and we thank Dr. Fatima Diton for the paper which she presented. The session dealt with the basic principles of managing land, wildlife, fishery, and forestry to achieve maximum benefits, and went on also to cover the challenges of putting and executing such principles. We end up with points of what African governments should be doing. The meeting was made to understand better the intricacies of resource endowments. It was made clear that having abundant natural resources does not necessarily and automatically confer wealth. It was clear that resource-rich countries in Africa have not been able to share resource gains, and at times leading to greatest cases of income inequality. Development under such circumstances can be analogous to survival of the fittest. Subsequently, the resulting natural resource mismanagement, compounded with climate change, will reverse the many of the hard-won development gains. All the above are a result of not adopting good basic principles of good natural resources management. Participants concurred that in order to properly articulate relevant natural resource management practices, we have to start by understanding the key threats. Mr. Kadu Sebunya refers to such threats as the drivers of resource mismanagement, and these are poverty, elements of the traditional African socio-economic setup, and certain cultural values and belief. I would like to emphasize these 2 words, elements of and certain. Otherwise, there are quite a number of African cultural practices which are positively augmenting sustainable management of natural resources. And the last one is the vast informal sector. The ultimate natural resource management principles and good practices ought to be tailor-made to suit the African context, encompassing the above threats. To achieve this, using His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete's words, there is a need for a better comprehension of, and I quote, the required balance between utilization and the rate of replenishment of renewable resources, and move away from the notion that such resources are unlimited and God-given. At the heart of achieving an all-inclusive strategy, principles and good practices of managing natural resources must recognize the issue of ownership. We need to address the question of who owns natural resources in Africa. The major challenges that limit African countries in their efforts to properly manage natural resources were outlined and included the three: human capacity, financial resources, and the political will. President Mkapa argued that, and I quote, Africa never benefited from the processes that generated carbon emissions depleting the ozone layer. And thus, in turn, Africa doesn't have financial resources and adequate knowledge on how to contend with the effects. As a result, we observe lack of coordination among authorities, poor definitions of roles and responsibilities, and lack of harmonizations of laws and policies related to environmental management within African countries and at continental level. Mr. Mufuruki touched on an issue which is pertinent here regarding the mindset. He pointed out the tendency of African leaders getting overwhelmed by the problems we face. They thus quickly resort to sourcing external assistance and aid. He argued that, and I quote, we have outsourced the task of taking care of our problems and at the same time, the opportunities we have. For that matter, what is required is a mindset change on our abilities to solve our problems, and particularly so those concerned with natural resource management. There are 4 recommendations for African governments. Africa needs 2 things. 1, leadership in natural resource management, and B, African institutions that can have a continental voice. Number 2, Africa ought to embrace the fact that it is capable of leading the global transformation process towards green economies by way of leapfrogging experience and technology. To achieve this, governments in Africa have to pursue 5 transitions that are with us right now. I'll go through them. 1, promoting sustainable urbanization. 2, investing in digital economies and taking part fully in the 4th industrial revolution. Number 3, promoting alternative energy opportunities. Number 4, investing to achieve sustainable and highly productive agriculture, and addressing issues like the slash and burn, which His Excellency Harry puts it as a very important issue. Leveraging better natural resource management by investing in supportive infrastructure. Africa should address the human capital challenge very aggressively. This will have to cover improvements in our education systems, prioritizing special needs of women and youth, the single largest untapped potential force for doing good in our societies. And lastly, number 4, African governments should attempt to diversify their economies away from relying on direct and unsustainable utilization of natural resources. Amongst measures that are pertinent is to put value to our natural resources and enhance responsible ownership of the same. Closed session number 2. The paper was presented by Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel. The session addressed the problem of illicit practices, wildlife, fishery, and forestry resources in Africa. There were quite a number of revealing statistics which were presented. In the document, they were there, but for the purpose of saving time, I'll jump there. Factors that contribute to increasing illicit practices in wildlife, fishery, and forestry resources in Africa include the following, and I think these are important. Economically motivating factors. Illegal natural resource trade is very lucrative business, and there is high consumer demand in the destination countries. Also, illegal natural resource trade is relatively high in Africa because of 2 other factors. 1, low chance of detection, and 2, low costs of executing illegal practices. 3, There is a link between illicit trade of natural resources and political instability in the region. Examples include the effects of refugees movements across country borders and the activities of warlords. Number 4, illegal practices are also induced by transformation failures. For example, the unsuccessful development of agriculture has led to encroachment of forestry reserves, poor management of water, etc. And lastly, shortfalls in legal frameworks also lead to failures to enforce laws and incentivizing corruption. There are 4 recommendations to the government. African governments and regional economic communities ought to raise awareness regarding Africa's ownership of these resources and do so in a manner that generates anger amongst the leaders and the population about how the outside world exploits our resources. Such anger should drive actions to establish policies and institutions that protect our natural resources. Illicit trade of Africa's natural resources is an act of interference with African countries' sovereignty. Number 2, African governments should facilitate public and joint public-private initiatives to protect African wildlife. Protecting African wildlife is equated to and is considered synonymous to protecting Africa's future. Number 3, African governments need to convince themselves that the problem is in their hands. Solutions should come from inside the continent. Examples including according adequate weight to political instability as a driver to illicit natural resource trade. Number 4, governments ought to design incentives for legal natural resource businesses, encourage intra-regional trade in natural resources, and also encourage private sector to invest in areas such as deep-sea fishing, currently only done by foreign firms. Governments should press for international measures to depress consumer demand of Africa's natural resources, especially wildlife, outside Africa. And lastly, African governments should advocate for criminalization of illicit trade of natural resources globally. In the last session, this is the one which we held this morning, we thank Dr. Yokuba for the presentation he made, and it dealt on climate change and its impact on natural resources. We concur that climate change is the biggest challenge humankind is facing now. It is a fundamental threat to development, good resource management, and also the fight against poverty. Climate change is increasingly becoming not only an environmental but also economic and social challenge in Africa. And Africa is relatively more vulnerable than sister continents. Rising climate change vulnerability imposes constraints on land, wildlife. I refer to Honorable Joyce Msuya's statistics with regard to 1 million species out of 8 million which are in danger of extinction. You could go deep and also produce the same numbers with fishery and forestry management. Continued greenhouse emissions also stand out as a major challenge calling for action. There is now a recognition that African countries need to stand together in the global arena to protect Africa's natural resources. His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete reminded us on the African Union Initiative, the Committee of Heads of State on Climate Change, and the position the continent has taken. Honorable Joyce Msuya also re-emphasized the need to abandon the fragmented Africa approaches and voices. And earlier on, if I remember correctly yesterday, His Excellency President Obasanjo had reminded the audience that when in cases and where Africa stood together, it emerged stronger and successful than when each country worked on solitary. We have 3 recommendations from the 3rd session. African governments ought to profile higher global warming and continue to institute measures to deal with the problem. Jointly, Africa should continue to pressurize major contributors to greenhouse gases, that is, the big polluters, to take proportionate responsibility and also honor commitments such as the one on carbon credit with relaxed conditions. In turn, Africa has to carve out a business case out of the climate change mitigation and adaptation agenda. African governments, number 2, African governments need to urgently address access to energy services through rapid and wide-scale expansion of both electricity generating capacity on-grid and off-grid, and the supply of other forms of energy. The forum concurred that whereas climate change is a global phenomenon, the impacts remain country-specific. Therefore, governments ought to continue investing in and promoting appropriate and proven mitigation and adaptation measures. In doing so, they should bring together the 3 pertinent communities of practice: policy, research, and practice in a more organized manner, and approach the challenge holistically via system. Your Excellencies, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Temu, for excellent delivery of the closing, the statement of the forum. Thank you so much. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we move to closing remarks, and let's give a warm round of applause to the convener of the forum, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Benjamin Mkapa. Thank you.
Forum participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My task is very simple, really, is to say thank you. First, to all of you for your attendance at this forum. It's been an impressive attendance because it has drawn people from all parts of our continent, both politically and linguistically. I commend particularly the gentleman from, is it Mali or Mali, Burkina Faso or something, who joined President Harry Mpimana, whatever it is, in showing the diversity of the participation in this forum. Thank you both very much indeed for your contribution. I also want to take this opportunity to express my delight at the range and spectrum of the participation. Professors, academics, industrialists, business people. There's a difference between being an industrialist and a businessman. One creates, the other one sells. But it has really enriched the level of discussion and the pace of monitoring what was going on around the continent. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for demonstrating a common perception of what the problems are and how they are interrelated, but above all, for identifying the kind of unity, interaction, and cooperation which can advance the cause of African economic independence through proper use and deployment of their natural resources. Thank you very much for this. I was very fearful when we picked the subject that we might drift into talking of the natural resources in terms of minerals only. But I am very glad that we balanced this, and there was very little reference to the wealth, the natural resources that are underground, because I wanted to show that it really starts with what you do on the land and the seas to give you the capacity to go deeper down the ground. So that I am very grateful that we are able to steer along that path. But above all, I want to say thank you for what I think is a common understanding now, which is that the natural resources on this continent and our seas are ours. They are ours. We talk and write about them as if they belong to those who are exploiting them, to those who colonized us. They are not, they are ours. That is the starting point for us setting our right to those natural resources. I'm glad that has come out, I think, in our summary, and I hope you can carry that message forward. I want to thank the presenters. They have been very, very clear and specific. They have stimulated very warm discussions. I have to thank them because almost all of them put an emphasis as a starting point, the question of education and communication. The winner of the essay last night did a great job of consolidating this communication and education. But he said it also greater recognition raises the anger with which we are being dispossessed of the opposition, of the possibility of using our natural resources for a speedier development. I have heard that word anger used very often. What I want to emphasize is that now that anger must start with us, with you, the delegates to this. I know it must be carried forward by the leaders because they don't seem to be sufficiently angered enough to drive this issue. But in order that they may be weaned into that, it must start with you. I ask that every one of you, whatever their site of work, whatever regional organization they are working in, to try to carry the summaries that we have presented, and if you have additional ones, present them to the Secretariat, to carry those to the knowledge of the organization you serve as a starting point. If you produce any journals, make sure that our summary also appears in them. That can help stimulate the process of discussing natural resource management and climate change. The anger must start with us. With that, really, I am left only, as I said, to thank the sponsors who I identified last night, and also the government of Finland. I want to thank the heads of state and government who honored our invitation. I want to thank President Mbeki for the boldness with which he said the problem is not that the path we have chosen to deal with these problems rests very much on the initiative of the leadership too much. In order to get momentum, it must also be driven from the populace. This is very important because otherwise you will have a top-down initiative which winds up at the top. But if it is a down initiative which pushes the top, then we can start having results. That's why I said it must start with us. I know that is a tall political order, and it can be a potential for misunderstandings and conflict. But it is true. Leadership alone must also be held, suspended in office by the drive of the people they lead and those who are downtrodden and dispossessed. So that is another plea that I'm making to all of us. And finally, I want to thank Professor Temu for a job very well done indeed. I noticed the patience with which you sat at the table, taking notes and so on. You have produced a great summary. I want to thank the Secretariat, led by the Professor Semboja of the Institute, for organizing this very well. So, in addition to asking you to be the forward carriers of the conclusions we have here, I want to assure you that the Institute will continue to drawing attention to the leadership of Africa in the search and consolidation of that African voice on the global scale that will ensure that we will survive and develop. Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch, travel safely home, and just to show for Professor here that I know a little French, bon voyage.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we close, His Excellency Benjamin Mkapa has said thank you to many people. Can we say thank you to him for convening this, the 6th year running now? Can we stand up, please, and just give him a round of applause and recognition? And I always do it the African way. Please do not stop. Thank you so much. We may sit down. It is now going to be time for us to exit and have lunch. I think direction will be given to our dignitaries on which way to exit. And for everybody else, lunch will be served as it was yesterday. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an absolute honor. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.